They say you can measure a man's character by how he treats someone who has nothing to offer him. I have found that to be painfully accurate. Because the people who speak the loudest, who carry themselves like the world owes them something, who look at a quiet old man and decide within seconds that he is irrelevant, those people tend to reveal everything about themselves without even realizing it. And I've spent most of my life watching them do exactly that. My name is Edward Miller. I'm 68 years old. I drive a 2004 sedan that makes a faint rattling noise every time I start the engine, like it's reminding me that it's been around longer than most people expect it to. The paint used to be black. Now it's something closer to a tired shade of charcoal, worn down by years of sun and rain and indifference. I live in a modest house on a quiet street where nothing particularly remarkable ever happens. The kind of neighborhood where people wave to each other out of habit, not obligation. Where mornings are slow and evenings arrive without announcement. My clothes are simple, clean but unremarkable. Nothing about me suggests importance. And that's exactly the point. A few years ago, a young salesman at a dealership tried to convince me to upgrade my car. He walked around it twice, tapped the hood like he was inspecting something fragile, then looked at me with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You deserve something better than this," he said. I smiled back and told him, "This one gets me where I need to go." He didn't understand what I meant. Most people don't. Because what they see is an old man who chose a quiet life. What they don't see, what no one sees, is that for the past 30 years, I've been building something far larger than anything that would ever fit into a conversation like that. A network of companies, real estate, logistics, investments spread across multiple states, structures layered carefully enough that my name doesn't appear anywhere it doesn't need to. No magazine features, no interviews, no headlines. Just results. I never cared much for recognition. Visibility has a way of attracting the wrong kind of attention. And over time, I learned something far more valuable than being known. I learned what people are like when they think you don't matter. That's when they stop performing. That's when they show you exactly who they are. And for most of my life, that knowledge has been useful. Very useful. But everything changed the day my daughter introduced me to the man she was going to marry. Because for the first time in a long time, I met someone who didn't just underestimate me. He dismissed me completely. And the most interesting part? He had absolutely no idea who I really was. And that, as it turns out, was a mistake he wouldn't understand until it was far too late. My daughter, Emily Miller, is 35 years old, and without exaggeration, she is the one thing in my life I have never once second-guessed. She's sharper than I ever was at her age. Warmer, too. The kind of person who listens when you speak, who remembers the small details most people overlook. When she laughs, it starts softly, almost like she's trying to hold it in, and then it fills the room before she realizes it. When she was 8, she once convinced me to extend her bedtime using a 3-part argument so well structured I remember sitting there halfway through thinking, I'm being negotiated with, and I'm losing. I let her win. Not because I had to, because I knew, even then, she was going to grow into someone who deserved to. So when she told me 3 years ago that she had met someone, I listened. When she told me his name was Daniel Cross, I nodded. And when she said she was serious about him, I paid attention. Now, I believe in being fair. I believe in giving people room to show you who they are before you decide who they are. So I gave Daniel that room, and he used every inch of it. Daniel Cross is 39 years old, tall, well-dressed, The kind of man who looks like he belongs in the room the moment he walks into it. His suits fit perfectly. His watch costs more than most people's monthly income. And he has this particular way of speaking, confident, smooth, always just a little louder than necessary. Within the first 15 minutes of meeting me, he managed to mention his MBA, his recent business trip to Zurich, and a deal he had closed that, in his words, most people wouldn't even understand. He said Zurich the way people say things when they want you to be impressed. I nodded. That sounds like quite an experience, I told him. He smiled, satisfied. That was the first time I saw it. Not arrogance, exactly, not at first. Something quieter, something more dangerous. A need to be seen as important, a need that grows when it's fed. 6 months after that dinner, Daniel called Emily with what he described as life-changing news. He had been appointed CEO of a logistics company called Northbridge Freight Solutions. Fast-growing, high-value contracts, strong market position. From the outside, it looked like a perfect success story. Recruitment firm, multiple interviews, board approval, everything about it was clean, professional, earned. And Daniel believed completely that it was. He celebrated that night, told Emily he had finally arrived, sent me a message that read, "Big news, just landed CEO. Hard work pays off." I replied, "Congratulations, I'm proud of you." And I meant it. At least, I meant part of it. Because what Daniel didn't know, what no one in that moment knew, was that Northbridge Freight Solutions was one of my companies. Not directly, never directly, layered through holding structures, buried under entities designed to keep my name exactly where I wanted it, out of sight. I had seen his application, reviewed his background, read every evaluation written about him. I had approved his appointment personally. And then I had gone home, changed into my gardening clothes, and made dinner. Daniel Cross became the CEO of my company. And he had absolutely no idea. At the time, I told myself something simple. Give him a chance. People surprise you. They grow into roles. They become better than your first impression. I have seen it happen many times. Daniel Cross did not surprise me. What he did instead was show me, slowly and consistently, exactly who he was when he believed he was the most important man in the room. And that, as it turns out, was far more revealing than anything he could have said. At first, it was subtle, almost invisible. The kind of things most people would ignore or pretend they didn't hear. But I've learned something over the years. Small things are never just small things. They're signals. And Daniel Cross was sending them constantly. It started in meetings. Whenever I was present, he would introduce me the same way. Emily's father, he would say with a polite smile. Retired, enjoys his quiet life. Retired. That word always makes people feel older than they are, like they've already finished something important, like there's nothing left to look at. I would nod, of course, smile politely, and let it pass. Because I have found that correcting people who underestimate you is usually a waste of energy. They don't hear you anyway. They only hear what confirms what they already believe. But what I didn't expect was how quickly Daniel began to believe his own version of reality. At a company dinner a few weeks later, I arrived slightly early. The room was already filling with executives, glasses of wine, soft laughter, conversations about growth, projections, expansion. I stood near the side of the room, observing. That's something I've always done well, watching without being noticed. Daniel was in the center of it all. Of course he was. He moved from group to group like he owned the oxygen in the room. When one of the younger executives asked about me, just a simple question, curiosity more than anything, I saw Daniel's expression change slightly. Not irritation, something worse. dismissal. "Oh, him?" Daniel said lightly, taking a sip of his drink. "He's Emily's father. Harmless guy. Bit old-fashioned. Doesn't really understand how modern business works, but he means well." Harmless. That was the second word. First was retired. Now, harmless. Each one smaller than the last, each one reducing me further. A man shrinking in real time inside someone else's story. I said nothing. I just watched. And I remembered, because memory is something people underestimate too. Later that same night, I walked past the corridor near the executive offices. I didn't intend to stop, but I heard his voice. Daniel was speaking to someone, another executive judging by the tone. Confident, comfortable, unfiltered. "He's a nice enough guy," Daniel said. A pause, then a small laugh. "Emily feels responsible for him, family obligation and all that. But honestly, he's just there. Kind of drifts around. Probably had his moment years ago." My steps slowed. Not because I was surprised, but because I was confirming something. The kind of confirmation you don't want, but need. He continued. "I just try to keep things smooth. You know how older people can be. They get sensitive." Older people. Sensitive. Each sentence was carefully casual, but every word was doing something very specific. Rewriting my existence into something manageable, something irrelevant, something safe to ignore. I turned quietly and walked away before he noticed me. No confrontation, no reaction, no correction. Just silence. Because silence, I've learned, has a way of collecting weight. And weight always comes due. That night I sat in my study for a long time. Not angry, not emotional, just observant. There is a difference people don't understand. Anger burns quickly, but observation lasts. And Daniel Cross had just given me something very important. Not disrespect, not insult. Clarity. And clarity, in my experience, is always the beginning of consequences. I looked out the window at the quiet street, at the world that still believed it understood me, and I thought about the dinner invitation I had just received for the coming weekend. Family dinner, Gerald Cross's estate, all of us together. One table, one conversation, one opportunity. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself a very small thought. They had no idea what they were inviting into that room. Not even close. The invitation came on a Thursday evening, a formal dinner, Gerald Cross's estate, family gathering, as they called it. One table, one evening, one carefully arranged moment where everyone would pretend to understand each other. I accepted, of course. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see something through to the end. Saturday arrived quietly, the way important days often do, without warning, without drama, just a slow unfolding of time. I woke up early, as I always do, made coffee, sat by the window, watched the light move across the garden, and I thought about the people I would see that evening. Not with anger, not with anticipation, with curiosity. Because by then, I already understood something they did not. People reveal themselves most clearly when they believe the outcome is already decided. I arrived at the Cross estate just before sunset. The driveway was long, immaculate, designed not just to impress, but to remind. This is who we are. This is where you are. And this is the difference. A valet approached my car as I pulled in. He paused slightly when he saw it, just a fraction of hesitation. Then professionalism returned. "Good evening, sir." I handed him the keys. "Take care of her," I said calmly. "She's older than she looks." He smiled politely, but I could tell he had already categorized everything about me in his mind. People do that quickly. Too quickly. Inside, the house was exactly what I expected. Expensive in a way that insists on being noticed. High ceilings, art that had never been questioned, furniture arranged more for display than comfort. Gerald Cross greeted me at the entrance. Firm handshake, measured smile. "William," he said warmly, "glad you could join us." Warmth is interesting. Some people wear it naturally, others apply it carefully, like polish. I could always tell the difference. Margaret appeared shortly after. Elegant, composed, the kind of woman who measures rooms before she enters them. "William, dear," she said, taking my hand with both of hers. "So lovely to finally have everyone together." Everyone. That word carried weight tonight, because I knew exactly who everyone included and who it quietly excluded. Daniel was already inside, of course he was, standing near the center of the room like he belonged there more than the room itself. When he saw me, his expression shifted, just slightly. The polite smile came first, then the familiar framing. "Ah, Emily's father," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Good to see you. Hope you're enjoying retirement." Retirement. Again, that word, as if life has an expiration date beyond usefulness. I nodded. "I am," I said simply. And I meant it. Emily hugged me shortly after, longer than usual, as if she sensed something beneath the surface she couldn't quite name. "You look calm tonight," she whispered. "I am," I replied, and that was true too. Dinner began as these dinners always do, carefully paced conversation, small talk dressed as importance, glassware touching softly like punctuation between sentences. Daniel dominated the room in the way he always did, speaking about markets, growth, vision. He enjoyed the sound of his own certainty. At one point I heard him say, "He's a nice guy, Emily's dad," a bit disconnected from how things actually work these days. A small laugh followed, not cruel, just dismissive, as if I were a concept, not a person. Then came the moment that changed the atmosphere. Margaret stood and placed a leather folder on the table, slowly, deliberately. "This," she said, smiling, "is something we've prepared as a family proposal." The room shifted, subtly but undeniably. Daniel straightened in his chair. Emily glanced at me. I did not move. The folder was slid across the table toward me, and in that moment, I understood exactly what it was. Not just documents, not just numbers. A direction. A decision disguised as consensus. I opened it, slowly, page by page, reading without expression. Inside, a proposal tied to Emily's inheritance, leveraged, structured, redirected, designed to fund Daniel's new venture, his vision, his future, his expansion, all requiring one thing: my approval. I closed the folder gently, set it down, and for a moment no one spoke. Not because they were uncertain, but because they were waiting. For me. And I realized then, they thought this dinner was about agreement, when in reality, it had already become something else entirely. I took a slow sip of water, looked around the table, and said nothing, because the right moment had not arrived yet. But it was very close. Very close, indeed. There is a moment in every long game when silence stops being patience and starts becoming preparation. That moment arrived for me as I sat at that dinner table, looking at the leather folder resting between us. No one spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everyone was waiting for a reaction, a decision, a direction. Daniel sat slightly forward now, confident again, too confident. The kind of confidence that comes when someone believes the outcome has already been negotiated in their favor. Margaret smiled softly as if everything was already resolved. Gerald watched me carefully, like a man observing a formality he had already mentally approved. Emily glanced at me only once, and then quickly away again. I opened the folder a second time, not because I needed to read it again, but because I wanted them to believe I was considering it. Page by page, slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch just enough to make them uncomfortable, but not enough for them to interrupt it. Inside was everything I expected: a structured financial proposal, leveraging Emily's inheritance, redirecting assets into Daniel's independent venture, a carefully constructed plan wrapped in family language: trust, opportunity, future. Words people use when they want agreement to feel like generosity. When I finally closed the folder, I did something simple. I placed it neatly back on the table, aligned it with the edge, like I was returning something to order. "I see," I said quietly. That was all. Daniel exhaled slightly, not obvious, but I saw it. Relief. Margaret's shoulders softened. Gerald nodded once, satisfied. They thought the silence meant acceptance. It didn't. It never does. "I'll need to review this properly," I continued calmly. "These types of arrangements require time." "Of course they do." That sentence is one of the most useful tools in the world. It tells people nothing, while giving them everything they want to hear. Daniel smiled. "Of course," he said quickly. "We expected that. No rush. Just excited about what's possible." Excited. Another word people use when they have already spent something they don't own yet. I nodded, then I stood. That was when the energy in the room shifted again, subtle but real, because standing changes the dynamic in a way sitting never does. "I appreciate the dinner," I said politely. "It's been informative." Informative. I saw Daniel hesitate for the first time that evening. Just a flicker, but enough. Emily stood too, instinctively. "Dad," she started. I raised my hand slightly, not to silence her, just to pause the moment. "I'll be in touch soon," I said, and then I left the table. Outside, the night air was colder than expected. The valet brought my car around. The same quiet judgment in his eyes as before, but this time I didn't care what he thought. Because while they were sitting inside that house celebrating patience, I was already several steps ahead. That night, I didn't sleep. I made one call, then another, and then a third. Not emotional calls, not reactive ones. Precise ones. Board members, legal oversight, internal audit authority. People who don't ask questions twice. "Begin a full review," I said simply. "Everything. Northbridge Freight Solutions, all internal activity, all transactions, all communications." There was a pause on the line. Then, "Understood." No hesitation. That's the difference experience makes. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. I went to my garden. Because there is something grounding about normality, something useful about appearing unchanged while everything beneath the surface begins to move. Daniel sent a message that afternoon. "Hope everything went well last night. Let me know when you're ready to move forward." I looked at it for a moment, then replied, "Still reviewing." And I set the phone down, because by then, the review had already begun. And what they thought was a negotiation was already turning into something else entirely. 2 weeks passed in silence. No calls, no meetings, no decisions. At least, not on their side. On mine, everything was already in motion. The audit report came in on a Thursday morning. I remember it clearly because I didn't feel surprised when I read it. Only confirmation. Daniel Cross had been using internal resources far beyond his authority. company contacts, confidential data, strategic relationships, all quietly redirected toward a venture that, on paper, looked independent, but in reality was anything but. He hadn't just been ambitious, he had been careless. And that, in my experience, is always what ends people. I closed the report, set it down, and made one final call. "Prepare the board," I said. "Today." No questions were asked because they already understood. When I arrived at the office that morning, everything felt different. Not because the building had changed, but because I had. The conference room was already full, board members seated, legal team present, documents arranged neatly in front of each chair. And at the head of the table, I sat down, calm, still, waiting. Exactly 4 minutes later, the door opened. Daniel Cross walked in, confident as always, until he saw me. That was the moment everything shifted, not suddenly, but in layers, like realization arriving one floor at a time. First confusion, then hesitation, then recognition, then something much quieter, uncertainty. He stopped walking just for a second. "Please, sit down," I said calmly. And he did. Because people always do when they realize the room no longer belongs to them. I opened the folder in front of me, not quickly, not dramatically, slowly, deliberately. "Northbridge Freight Solutions," I said, "is not what you believed it to be." Silence. I continued. "It is a subsidiary of my holding structure, fully owned, fully controlled, and fully audited." I looked up. "Which means everything you built was built inside my system." The words didn't land immediately. They rarely do. It takes time for reality to catch up to expectation. Then I saw it. The shift. The breaking point. The understanding. Daniel's hands tightened slightly on the table. His voice came quieter now. "That's not possible." I nodded. "It is." I slid the audit report forward. No unauthorized independence, no external separation, and multiple breaches of fiduciary duty. Each sentence landed heavier than the last, not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't need to. "I'm not here to destroy you," I said after a pause, and I meant it. That surprised him more than anything else. "I'm here to resolve it." I leaned back slightly. "You will resign today, quietly, professionally, no public exposure." A pause. Then I added, "And this ends here." The room was silent. Even the air felt still. Daniel looked down. For the first time since I had met him, he didn't look confident. He didn't look powerful. He looked like someone realizing the story he was telling himself was never real. Finally, he nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. "Just one word, but enough." After he left, the room remained still. No one spoke. Until one board member finally asked, "And the inheritance arrangement?" I allowed myself the smallest pause, then replied, "It was never collateral. A beat. It was already secured. In her name." That was the moment everything ended. Not with noise, but with understanding. That evening I drove home. The same road, the same car, the same quiet streets. But everything felt different. Because when you remove illusion from a system, what remains is clarity. Emily was waiting at the kitchen table when I arrived, 2 cups of tea already poured. She looked at me for a long moment, then asked the only question that mattered. "Is it over?" I nodded. Yes. She didn't smile immediately. She just looked down at her hands, then whispered, "Why didn't I see it?" I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "Because you trusted people to be who they said they were," I replied. "And that is not a weakness." A pause. "It's a strength they don't deserve." She cried quietly then, not from loss, but from release. And I let her, because some victories are not loud. Some victories are simply the absence of chaos. Later that night, I sat alone by the window. The garden outside was still, the house was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, there was nothing left to prepare. Only peace. And sometimes, that is the most powerful ending of all.